Sometimes it can be, I think, difficult to see the connections between the daily, often very mundane or ordinary tasks that we're doing in our work and this kind of grand vision of bringing flourishing or shalom to the world. Think of the accountant who's just sitting there looking at a spreadsheet, or the janitor that's mopping up a spill in the school cafeteria. These things can just feel so ordinary. But I think that we have to recognize that those activities are in fact making something of the world that we live in, and they are part of organizing the creation for human flourishing. Sometimes we have to really use our minds intentionally to think about how these very ordinary tasks that we're doing really do, in the long run, connect to God's work in the world.
Because of the effects of the fall, our work can be toilsome at times. And in fact, sometimes it might be just plain drudgery. What about the person who's working on an assembly line all day? They're just putting widgets together. Well, all of us, no matter what kind of work we do, no matter how much we enjoy our work, we all have chores to do. We all have things that aren't enjoyable. I have a friend who's a vocational counselor, and he once told me that if a person is energized by their work, 60% of the time, that's a very high percentage. And if you're in that category, consider yourself very blessed. I once did an interview with Bonnie Wurzbacher, who at the time was the Senior Vice President of Global Accounts for the Coca-Cola Company. She is a committed follower of Christ, and during this interview, she made a statement that I'll never forget. She said, "We don't find meaning in our work. We bring meaning to our work." And she went on to relate a story that's been around for a long time about three men who were all laying bricks, constructing a wall. And all three men were asked what they were doing. And the first man said in a grumpy voice, he said, "I'm building a wall." And the second man said, I'm earning my daily bread, and I'm making the rent payment." But the third man replied with a smile of satisfaction, and he said, "I'm building a great cathedral." Now, the activity was the same for all three workers, but the mental context of their work was vastly different. The context of one worker allowed him to bring extraordinary meaning to what most people would think of as a very mundane job. Now, I believe the key to bringing meaning to work, no matter whether it's washing dishes or making widgets or selling refrigerators to Eskimos, the challenge is to put our work into the context of something much larger than the work itself. And as followers of Christ, we can do this by putting our work, no matter what it is, in the context of a bigger picture, a biblical view of God, of creation, of humanity, of moral order and purpose. Now, George Washington Carver was one of these followers of Christ who actually did this. And we'd like to show you a short video clip about Carver's life and about his work with plants. We're showing you this because it illustrates the art and science of contextualization, and we'll talk more about that after the video.
George Washington Carver was born at about 1865, the son of slaves. His father was killed in a log hauling accident a few weeks after George was born. While still an infant, he was kidnapped along with his mother and sister by thieves wanting to make some money by selling them to another slave owner. Moses Carver, their current owner, sent someone after them with a good racehorse to buy them back. The kidnappers took the horse and left George lying on the ground, sick with whooping cough. His mother and sister were never heard from again. Carver's relationship with the Lord began early in life. He wrote, "I was just a mere boy when converted, hardly 10 years old. There isn't much of a story to it. God just came into my heart one afternoon while I was alone in the loft of our big barn, while I was shelling corn to carry to the mill to be ground to meal." Carver had a passion for learning. That passion led him to earn a degree in agriculture from Iowa State College as the first African-American student there. In Carver's day, the South was a one-crop economy, cotton. It was the only crop banks would lend money to farmers for planting. But the soil became depleted through repeated planting of cotton year after year. Carver knew that if the farmers planted legumes, like peanuts and sweet potatoes, it would revive the soil. The only problem was, in those days, there was no market for peanuts and sweet potatoes. So Carver set out to create a market and invented 300 uses of the peanut and 118 uses of the sweet potato in his lab at Alabama's Tuskegee Institute. Booker T. Washington was the head of Tuskegee at the time. He invited Carver to come to his school when Carver was 31 years old. In his invitation, Washington wrote, "Our students are poor, often starving. We teach them to read and write, but words cannot fill stomachs. They need to learn how to plant and harvest crops. I cannot offer you money, position, or fame. These things I now ask you to give up. I offer you in their place work, hard work, the challenge of bringing people from degradation, poverty, and waste to full manhood." Carver's response was, "I shall be glad to cooperate with you in doing all that I can through Christ who strengtheneth me to better the condition of our people." And Carver did just that. He said, "I took just a handful of peanuts and looked at them. 'Great Creator,' I said, 'why did you make the peanut? Why?' God answered his prayer. He said, 'The great Creator taught me to take the peanut apart and put it together again. And out of the process have come forth all these products.'" He called his lab God's Little Workshop. Included among the many products from the peanut, the sweet potato, and soybean are instant coffee, chili sauce, mayonnaise, molasses, meat tenderizer, shaving cream, wood stain, printer's ink, adhesives, axle grease, bleach, linoleum, and fuel briquettes. Carver gave God the credit. He said, "No books ever go into my laboratory. I never have to grope for methods. The method is revealed the moment I am inspired to create something new. Without God to draw aside the curtain, I would be helpless." Dr. Carver locked the door to his lab when he was creating things. He said, "Only alone can I draw close enough to God to discover His secrets." In 1921, when speaking before the U.S. House Ways and Means Committee in Washington, D.C., he was asked, "Dr. Carver, how did you learn all of these things?" Carver answered, "From an old book." "What book?" asked the chairman. Carver replied, "The Bible." The chairman inquired, "Does the Bible tell about peanuts?" "No, sir," Dr. Carver replied, "but it tells about the God who made the peanut. I asked him to show me what to do with the peanut, and he did."
In the later sessions I'll be doing specifically for educators, I'm going to be introducing a tool that will help students to bring meaning to their schoolwork by putting it in the context of something bigger than that work, in the context of a bigger picture of a biblical frame of reference. And that tool is called the Awesome Activator. It's a mind mapping exercise that starts out by asking students to brainstorm about how their particular work, schoolwork, how that work can be put into the context of a biblical worldview. Now, I want to give you a little taste of this tool by imagining how George Washington Carver might have used this mind map. And let's say Carver identified his work as helping Southern farmers to be successful. Now, I can imagine Carver writing some biblical truths in his mind map that relate to that work. Something like this. He might have written in a bubble to the side of that context, God created plants, and he intends for humans to rule over them. And I think he would have put another bubble there that says humans have a responsibility to govern over plants in ways that are resourceful and beneficial. And I imagine he probably had another bubble there that said humans are to be loved in practical ways, and I can do this through my work with plants. And then maybe he had another bubble that said, God shares his secrets with those who wait on him for direction. And I'm sure there were many other biblical truths that formed a context for Carver's work with plants. Truths that allowed him to see that he was building a cathedral and not just laying bricks. I encourage you to try this mind mapping exercise for yourself. Just put whatever work you're doing in the center of a piece of paper, and then think about any biblical truths that relate to that work. You might ask yourself a few questions like, well, what purpose does God have for the things I'm working with? What purpose does God see in these products that I'm selling? Do they serve a need? Are they helping others? What service is being provided for other people that is a blessing to them? And how can I imitate God through this work that I'm doing, even if it's putting together those widgets? Now, in the later sessions for educators, which, by the way, are not just for school teachers, but they're for parents and pastors too, because parents and pastors are educators, I'm going to provide a list of questions that you can ask yourself about your work. Questions that will help you put your work into the context of a larger frame of reference, the largest frame of reference in the universe, a biblical view of reality. And in doing that, you can see beyond the work itself, and you can bring meaning to your work and see that you're really building a cathedral. You're not just laying bricks.